It's been a while since I made some video tutorials, so I'll try not to screw up too bad, so just bear with me. So let's make a new project, and let's just name this server, and let's import a couple of things. And now let's create a new socket. Press family, internetwork, socket type .stream, protocol type .tcp. This creates a basic TCP socket. And now let's bind it. New IP endpoint 0.94 and sock.listen 0. So what this does, this binds the socket to a certain port. Now they'll say it binds to a new IP endpoint, but the way this is being done, it just binds it to that port, so it accepts any connection that comes in. So a connection that comes from the web to your router, and then it's made on this certain port, it'll be directed to this socket. And listen, well, it just basically does what it says. It puts it in a listening state, ready for connections. Now, what most beginners would do is they'll try and do this when they use bind. I mean, that seems like it would be right, but if you do this and connections start coming in, then this socket will only accept connections from this IP address. So, for example, you don't have to type this out, just using this as an example. Okay, now we have our listener, and it's bound to this port, or to this IP endpoint, which is 127.0.0.1, the local machine address, and our port of 1994. And then it listens, and 0 just means there's no queue, so it'll accept any connection that comes in, and there won't be queued, blah blah blah, technical stuff. You can read up about that later on. And I'm just creating a new thread, because this blocks until a connection is made. So it'll set our accept variable to the newly created socket, and then this will connect to our listener. So if we run this, let's wait so you guys can see. And if we debug this, you can see a connection was made. Now, because it was connected from this IP address. So if we try to connect to, say, which is on the same machine, but when the connection is made, the IP address will be identified as this. And if we debug this, a connection wasn't made because it's waiting for this IP address. Now if we use IP address.parse, or we use just plain old 0, which is what I prefer, which means the same thing, any IP address. then a connection can be accepted from anywhere. So now that we have them, well, now that you guys have seen that, let's go back to what we were doing before. Alright, now socket accept equals socket.accept. And you've seen this before. This will block until a connection is made and accepted. And now let's do a little receiving. So let's create a new buffer, byte array, buffer equals encoding dot default dot get bytes hello CC's hello world. And now we'll send this to our client that's connected. Send buffer 0 buffer.length and 0. So what this is it's going to send the byte array, the offset, which will start at 0, which would be the H in hello world, and then the buffer.length, which is 12, the length of the byte array, and socket flags 0 is the same as socket flags dot none. I just put 0 since it's easier. And now we have to make a new buffer when we receive data equals new byte 255, or you could just reuse our old buffer. Let's do that just for memory wise. Equals new byte 255. And int res equals accept.receive buffer 0 buffer.length and 0. So what this does is that it'll wait for data that comes in from the client or from the connected socket, I should just say that, and it'll store it in this buffer. Now what this variable is this will store the actual amount of data that's read. So let's say our byte array is 255. Now if the client sends 20 bytes, then it'll be filled with just 20 bytes, but then the rest will just be white spaces, and we don't need that. So we're going to use this variable to resize the buffer to only show or to only keep what we need. So after we receive the data, then you can either do this manually or you can use array.resize, which is what we'll do for now. Ref our buffer, and the new size, which is res. So if our buffer size is 255, and then we resize it to what we actually received, example 20 bytes, then it'll be resized down to 20 bytes. And then let's write to the console what we received. Get string buffer. And then after we receive the data, we write to the console, and then the console will just wait for input, and then it'll close. So this is our basic server connection. Oops, right, let's clean up everything. Socket.close, accept.close. And then the console will wait for input, and then it'll close. So this is our basic server, and next tutorial we will code our client.